What is up, Coordination? On the pod today, we have Julian Zawistowski and James Kiernan of Octant. Octant is a platform for experiments in decentralized governance and regenerative funding developed by the Golem Foundation. So Julian is an economist and founder of the Golem Foundation and of Octant. He's a master's in international politics and economics from the Warsaw School of Economics and is a member of the Foundation Council at the Warsaw Institute for Structural Research. He's leading the development of Octant on all fronts. And James Kiernan is the head of community at Octant. So what is Octant? Octant is a testing ground for conducting governance experiments that directly impact the allocation of rewards from staking of 100,000 ETH from the Golem treasury. So basically, it was a platform developed by the Golem Foundation to test a few hypotheses around community engagement, participatory funding, and user-centric governance. Basically, they are running an experiment in order to fund public goods, and they're going to have 10 projects in the first stage that are going to receive funding based off of the amount of tokens that are staked on top of this treasury amount. So what I think is really cool is that they're developing novel mechanisms for funding public goods in and around their ecosystem. Octant seems like it is an interesting place to build these type of experiments. And the fact that Golem has a huge treasury that they're putting to use here is interesting as well. So, on behalf of Optimism, SolarPunk, Giveth, Gitcoin, all of the public goods funding projects in the ecosystem, I think it'd be fun to welcome Octant, another player, to the chat. So that's why this episode is about Octant. Julian and James, I think, are just gigabrains who care so deeply about funding public goods. And this episode is about that experiment. So without further ado, I give you Julian and James.
ValleyDAO is an open global collective working to finance and democratize the governance of synthetic biology technologies to protect the future of our planet. Research and progress into synthetic biology is critically constrained by the world of nation-state regulations and bureaucracy from middlemen. But the potential that synthetic biology has for the world is massive. It can produce a world in total harmony with nature. We can grow stuff using cells like software. It's awesome. And the best part is we no longer have to pull carbon out of the ground to grow and maintain civilization. Don't you think we should be funding this? ValleyDAO does, and that's what they're here to do, to try and make the SolarPunk world of tomorrow a reality today. So join ValleyDAO right now and save the planet at valleydao.bio.
Julian, James, how you doing?
Right, thanks.
Yeah, doing well.
So glad to have you. So can you tell us what Octant is?
Octant is our attempt in decentralized governance and product funding. And we see that as a kind of experiment. But of course, like an experiment with real funds. So the idea is that we are going to stake like the ETH that Golem Foundation holds up to 100,000, and we are building Octant as a governance tool for GLM token holders to decide like what happens with the yield. And the mechanism is that there is like a part of the funds that they can keep. There is like a part of funds that goes to the matching funding to fund whatever the community decides to fund. The vote on what to fund happens with the self-taxation by the users of their reward from this ETH staking. And I think that's the shortest description. And the fun thing is that even with that very simple setup, we have interesting marginal effects, because that means, for example, that if people do not want to self-taxate themselves in general to support interesting project, that the first person that decides to do that decides on all the matching funds. So the leverage is huge, which can prompt the others to join that game as well. And it is iterative. So we envision that will be like a 2 weeks decision window after every a 3 months long accumulation of the stake. During that decision window, you will be able to change your vote. So basically, you will see how your vote aggregates with what others do, and change your vote accordingly.
Yeah, and I think I would add to that too, just stepping back a little bit of a higher level, is that we recognize that, I forget the stat that I saw at one of the ETH conferences recently, the majority of DAOs more or less consists of a snapshot and a multisig. So we wanted to create this more or less fertile ground to be able to test different hypotheses around, community engagement, participatory funding, different, governance tools and frameworks, so that getting real-time feedback or real valuable data about what works and what doesn't work, so that developers can be really confident about the tools that they're building.
I see that a little bit as, experiment in economics. But the truth is that if you run like an experiment, you have to run it for real. So with the real money, real people, we are real public goods projects. And of course, that focus on, at least at the beginning, is on a core Web3 public goods, like whatever that means, of course, because the definition is difficult.
Got it. So it feels like this is a testing ground for conducting governance experiments that are going to fund public goods. And the first Epoch Zero is a one-time event where people can stake tokens, and then according to what they stake, that'll be distributed to some amount of public goods. And then from there, you're going to iterate from there in order to hit some sort of like local maxima of what you're funding. Is that too reductionist, or is that a fair summary of what y'all are doing?
Yeah, I would step back and say that Epoch Zero is a pre-launch event, so it doesn't involve GLM. It's that's going to be a community bootstrapping event that we are doing in order to find community members who more or less care about funding public goods, who are interested in maybe contributing to some of the experiments that we want to do with Octant down the road. So the Epoch Zero event is simply going to be using an NFT that community members who care about funding public goods are going to be receiving through live events and virtual events. That's more or less how we're going to be distributing it. And then there's going to be a vote held on Snapshot that will decide how the funds are going to be distributed. But yeah, just stepping back there, Epoch Zero is separate from Octant and the application that we're going to be subsequently launching after.
Yeah, Epoch Zero will be Snapshot and multisig actually, and only will the consecutive Epoch 1 and Epoch 2 will be moving towards something much more complicated and interesting in a way.
Can you say more about what inspired the need for this experiment, and where sort of the affinity for public goods comes from? What do you really hope to accomplish by exploring this design space?
So there is of course a short answer and a long answer. The short answer is that, as a foundation, we have that pile of ETH and we want to do something useful with it that would be both useful for community and for GLM token holders. And I think that, that application really nicely combines those two. Because, on the other hand, I don't really find fascinating projects that are only around yield on something. But on the other hand, our obligation, our liability as a Golem Foundation is pretty straightforward. This is a liability towards GLM token holders. And the long answer is that personally, I joined that space because of everything related to governance and voting, and also public goods funding. So a Golem crowdfunding itself, the Golem token sale, happened in 2016, when I think a lot of people, including me, thought about that as a way of rising public funding or rising funding from the public on exciting tech projects, and not necessarily as get rich fast ICO products as it evolved later on in the community. So that way of thinking, at least among some team members, and also I believe some of our community members, some people who jumped on Golem really early on, is present all the time in things we do and how we think about the space.
So it feels like I heard in there it's a way to use your sort of your ETH treasury, which is quite massive, for the public good. It'll be a way of of creating utility for the GLM token, and then it's also a way of kind of building public goods around the Golem ecosystem. And a lot of this is just exploring the design space of collective intelligence and how to collectively build an ecosystem.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Those are some threads that I heard in there.
Yeah, exactly. So this area, this topic is so broad that I don't even know where to start. That like the truth is that I think we are in a very interesting point as a space right now, exploring exactly the ways how we can build this parallel reality of ours, like perhaps even something that like is like a proto state, and with that we need like a efficient mechanism to fund things, to making things happen. And of course, like to make something happen, you have both to fund it and you have to decide like what you fund. So you need like a really efficient and sustainable coordination mechanism. And I think like we as a space, as a Web3, we have a lot of money, and we also have some coordination mechanisms. But I think we are still struggling to combine the two in a efficient and sustainable way. So this is like a attempt to explore avenues how that could happen with what we have at the moment.
So this first experiment kicks off in the next couple months, and then are you thinking about doing them quarterly? How often will the experiments be, or is it too early to say?
Well, we don't set any final date for that. So at the moment, I assume that will be just perpetual. And at the moment, it seems that the 3-month epoch is like the make most sense for the number of reasons. You have to balance, like, first, to not ask community engagement too often, but also, not let people forget about you. And also you need to accumulate some of ETH from staking just to have something to vote around. So seems from some simulations we have that 3 months is about optimal, but we might adjust that in the future if that turns out that to be too often or too rare. We'll see. And yeah, I'm pretty sure that even with the like a 40-day queue now to stake ETH, we will be able to launch in the third quarter.
Just to step back, that's the queue right now to get a validator up and live is about, I think 37, 40 days, something like that. So Julian, do you want to mention that really quickly, that we're starting to get some of those validators up, or should we talk about that maybe a little bit later? I think that's pretty exciting.
Depending on when exactly we'll be on air, like I believe we will be midway through that path. It's happening. Like we decided to go our own way with staking. So basically building like the custom setup for that. And yeah, we of course want to do that carefully when we talk about that amount of ETH to be staked.
I would invite the audience to check out octant.build, which is a link to the website for this experiment. It's really quite a beautiful website that explains a lot of this stuff. That'll be a link in the show notes where people can check out the Octant experiment that you are doing. And really excited to see more experiments in funding public goods and distributing ETH rewards to the community. And I just think that this plurality of different funding mechanisms between quadratic funding and retroactive public goods funding, and what Protocol Guild is doing with the self-curating registry is quite interesting. And this feels like another tool in the toolbox for ecosystems, if it's successful, to help coordinate around what their public goods are. So we'll be really excited to see how the first experiment goes.
Awesome. Yeah, we're really excited as well. I think, you touched on a really good point. There's this like blossoming funding public goods ecosystem that seems to be growing more and more, with a lot of really intelligent people behind it that are building. So a lot to be excited about there.
And how would you compare the mechanism that Octant is using, which there's a diagram of on the website, and I think that it's quite elegant in that you stake and you get to use that stake in order to vote on where the funds go. How would you say that it compares to quadratic funding or some of the experiments that, say, Optimism has done with retroactive public goods funding? Is there something new in the signal generation that you're trying to do in this mechanism? Mm-hmm. And if so, What is it? What is your North Star?
Starting with similarities, perhaps. I think that the word is similar, that, like we get some funds from somewhere, we get some projects from somewhere, and then we get people to have some voting mechanism to decide on the distribution. So I would say that similarity. But then I think there are more differences than similarities. Then first, we don't use quadratic funding for the matching fund. We actually consider that we might want to do that somewhere in the future, because if you think about Octant at the moment, with all the things that I love about it, about the idea, and because of that, I'm pushing it, of course. Like with current design, Octant is plutocracy in a way, because that this is of power. The more GLM you have, the more GLM you lock, the more power you have. So that this is clearly plutocracy. If we introduce like a quadratic funding for like a self-taxation part, not for the individual reward part, but for the self-taxation part, that would be less of plutocracy for sure, and would have like a diversity, and will also empower smaller players. So quadratic funding is something we are thinking about. Of course, that needs some kind of like a Gitcoin passport or whatever else to ensure uniqueness of the users. But this is definitely something to consider in the future. As for like a Gitcoin rounds or other mechanisms that are around, I think the biggest difference between what we do and what other things that happens, that we have like a built-in algorithm for the matching fund. So matching fund is not the subject of like the decision of the donors, but is the consequence of how Octant is built. So in details, that works in a way that the entitlement of the individual GLM holder is linear. So basically, if you lock 1% of GLM, you got 1% of staking reward as your individual reward. But then what goes to Octant as a whole is like a square root of that share. So if 25% of GLM is locked in Octant, then half of the staking revenue goes to Octant, and how it is for individuals, and half is a matching pool, and the rest stays in the pool to increase the rewards for the next epoch. So I would say that built-in mechanism is the biggest difference. Of course, this is still somehow arbitrary, because we stake the ETH. In theory, we can say, end of the game, folks. We are taking the ETH and end of fun. But that's not our plan at the moment. As I said, we want to make that perpetual.
Yeah, there's a really beautiful hand-drawn diagram that shows how the accumulated staking rewards go through Octant in order to get to the public goods. And then we can have a link to that in the show notes. And I think the picture is worth 1,000 words about how the mechanism works.
This is all simple, but difficult to describe. Also, if you look in the paper, like the math there is pretty simple. This is like adding and multiplying things all the time. But if you try to formalize that, it becomes a little bit dense.
Well, I'm wondering, in a world in which you're maximally successful, how does this change the incentive gradient of the people around you, and the incentive gradient of people in the space? What do you really want to be? What do you really want to achieve in a world in which you're maximally successful with this experiment?
Well, I think the first measure of success will be that we have a really active community that decides on what gets funded in a reasonable way, like whatever reasonable means here. Because having like the nice mechanism on taking decisions is one thing, and then having a community, having people who use that in a reasonable way is something else. And that might be the fault of the mechanism. That might be the fault of the GLM distribution that it will turn out that, well, in fact, 95% of supply is with the exchanges, so we are doing that for no one. And I don't think that's the case, by the way. I still have some connections with the Golem community in that regard. So I think that's not the case, but theoretically that's possible. So I think like the step number one is to build like the community that is really interested in funding that public goods. And I think there's like a good parallel, with what we see with the democracy worldwide at the moment. So one of the main problems probably is that people are not getting involved, or even if they are getting involved, they are not getting involved in a reasonable way. So that's like the first checkpoint. And the second, and I think that will be even more interesting, is if we are able to generalize the funding into not so obvious things. Because, at the moment we have like a kind of obvious projects on the list. And by saying that they are obvious, I don't mean that they are not worth our support. On the contrary, I think by all means they are worth our support. But this is like the easy way of doing that. Like a Gitcoin matching pool, yeah, of course this is worth supporting. We can throw everything there and use your expertise for that funds to be distributed further. End of the story. Pretty the same story with a lot of other projects we've got there. But then I think if you have like a decent decision taking mechanism, then you are able to pick like a really great projects and also fund them in a really reasonable way. So do not give them too much, not give them too little, but just make them happen and make them successful. And that would be like the really great farther out result. And as for the motivations of people who are in, like obviously, if you are a GLM token holder, you will be interested to participate for the yield. But I hope we will be able to convince people that this is really worth to self-taxate themselves, to give back some of that yield, to make like great things happen. And also, that mechanism is something that I really want to see working, and I will be happy to see working because, well, I'm maybe not a 100% libertarian. I think that people through coordination need to impose some restrictions on themselves as a community on the one hand, but on the other hand, I would really love to see that experiment in self-taxation working, and that people are able to fund things that way.
Got it. So I heard active community funding public goods, connecting the people who are creating value to actually funding value, and actively people showing up and staking their tokens in order to do it. Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to have you back in a year and see how the first couple experiments went, and you can turn this into a line, not a dot. James, I'm wondering if you have anything to add. I know that you're a little bit closer to this.
Yeah, I think just mentioning what we kind of alluded to in the beginning there is that we have this special pre-launch event that is not going to be functioning through the app that we're building, Octant, but it's just going to be a pre-launch event that takes place on Snapshot, and we're looking to build a community out of that. There's some really exciting things that we have for anybody who wants to be able to participate in choosing how this large pile of ETH is going to be distributed to our early stage partners. We have some really awesome projects that we're syncing with around this initiative called Epoch Zero. So that's going to be Gitcoin. You said Protocol Guild, they're one as well. Super Modular, Ethereum Cat Herders, ETH Staker, Kernel, DAO Drops, Drips, ClearFund, and Giveth. So we're really excited to partner with all of these guys and to hopefully drive some impactful funding their way. And so if there's community members out there that are interested in participating in this process, either join our Discord or follow us on Twitter, and there's going to be a lot more information coming out about how you can participate, and then subsequently how you can participate in Octant from there.
Amazing. Well, for the audience, you want to check out octant.build, which is the website for this experiment, and I'm sure that'll be updated with more information as the experiment continues. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to say? And Julian, maybe we'll start with you and then go to James.
Well, I think for Octant, we've got it covered. Of course, we can explore, different avenues of tech and of like a Web3 space. But James, I think Octant we've got covered, more or less.
Yeah, I think we got that covered. I would say as far as live events go, we're going to be at ETH Prague, at Funding the Commons, at attending ETHCC, and then also going to be hanging out with the Gitcoin guys at Shelling Point. So if anybody is attending any of those live events, we would love to connect with you and maybe chat about ideas that you have. I think we have some events planned later on this year as well. I'm thinking Berlin, but live events, we would love to meet any builders or anybody who's interested in funding public goods and just chatting and meeting the community face-to-face if that opportunity is there.
We're looking forward to that. Well, thanks so much for appearing on the GreenPilled podcast. Excited about the Octant experiment. Excited to have you back and talk about how the first couple experiments went, and keep up the good fight.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you very much.
Peace and love.